I put this video together to find out at what temperature items commonly found in your engine bay would combust. Now, I'm doing this with radiant heat to try to mimic what it would be like if these materials were close to things like the hot side of a turbo, downpipe, or exhaust manifolds. The three items tested in this video are wire loom, primary wire, and heat wrap. First item to test is non-heat rated wire loom. This is very commonly found in most vehicles' engine bays, especially ones that have a lot of aftermarket wiring. People like to use this to dress up the wiring and tuck things, make it have a much cleaner appearance. I was really curious to see at what temperature this would combust because of how commonly found it is in engine bays. I did this test for about 10 to 15 minutes. The video is a little bit sped up, and as you can see, 200 degrees, it deforms, and then it kind of stays that way for a while until we get around the 320, 350 degree range. That's when you see it start to smolder. It starts to shrink even more, and then not long after, it begins to combust. The next thing I wanted to test was wiring. Now, this being the wiring that you would find inside of that loom. With the temperature of the loom not being affected really till 300 something degrees, I started this test off a lot more aggressively, moving it much closer to the forge from the start. Not much really happens from 200 to 300, even up to 400 degrees. The wire really holds up. There's really no effect to the outer insulation or the wire itself. Now, this test once again went on for about 10 to 15 minutes with very little happening, even all the way up to 700 degrees. So eventually I got tired of this and I said, well, let me just put it right over the front of the forge and see what would happen. When I placed it over the top of the forge, it came in contact with the open flame, which at that point it immediately combusted. So it kind of skewed the results of the test, but it did show that this wire will hold up to temperatures north of 800 degrees with little to no effect. So the next question I had is, at what temperature would the voltage be affected? So what I did was I took a battery, attached it to the wire, and strung it across the front of the forge. When I first started this test, I put the wire right up against the forge. The idea is to burn off the coating and see when the voltage gets affected. Now, the battery I'm using was an older battery, so the voltage starting was around 4 volts. And you can see once the coating burns off, it quickly drops below 3 volts, but then it does hold that voltage. It holds around 2.8 to 2.9 volts for the length of the test. This, once again, I did for about 10 to 15 minutes, and there was not much change. I was kind of curious at what temperature or what time the wire would fail, which it never ended up failing, and I ended up just giving it a tug to see how strong it was after that long burn, and as you can see, it separated fairly easily. This next test is something that's a common issue when it comes to turbocharged cars. Turbocharged cars are known for having oil saturation in the heat wrap and in the turbo blankets, so this was a really good experiment to find out how dangerous that actually is. What I did for this test was I soaked the heat wrap in oil for about 10 minutes and then laid it on the brick to see how it would perform. As you can see from the start, right around 320, 330, the oil starts to smoke. And then as the temperature starts to build throughout the wrap itself, you'll see that it combusts, and it actually combusts at a very low temperature, which was a little alarming. You'll see right around the 380, 390 mark that the far end of the wrap starts to smoke very heavily, and then not long after, it begins to combust. Now, this is alarming because heat wrap is generally going to be on the hottest part of the engine, and EGTs and turbo cars can very easily go north of 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. So the piping that this is wrapped around is going to be well north of 380 to 400 degrees. For the last test, I wanted to see what would happen if you have oil soaked heat wrap on, let's say, a downpipe, a manifold, or the hot side of a turbo. Not exactly the best example, but you get what I'm going for here. The metal pole would be your downpipe, let's say. And then I soaked the heat wrap again in oil, wrapped it around, and put it in the forge. Now what I'm trying to mimic is the temperature coming down the pipe and coming in contact with the heat wrap. This test was a little more surprising because you can see that at a lower temperature, or let's just say much more rapidly, the heat wrap can bust. I think that with a combination of the temperature of the metal and the radiant heat around it, you'll see that the oil can bust much earlier than it did on the original test. Now, I know this test isn't 100% scientific, but I wanted to get some kind of an understanding at what temperature these different items would fail. And I gotta say, it was pretty eye-opening at how low of a temperature some of them did combust. So with that being said, I've removed all the plastic wire loom from under the hood of my car and replaced it with temperature rated loom. I've also moved anything non-metallic from the hot side of my engine bay. My biggest fear is losing my car to a fire. So that's initially what drove me to do this test. If you found it interesting or you have any other items that you want me to test, let me know. Drop a comment below and I will do a follow-up video to put those items to the test as well.